Did you feel pressure? I'm asking this because I told you a little bit about growing up where I did. So again, the context for me, it is essentially a Black public school system and a white private school system in my hometown. And there is a county spelling bee that's part of the national spelling bee that everyone has. I told you my mother's an English teacher, right? And so I am in fifth grade was when you become eligible. I win the spelling bee for the first time anybody in my school has done it, right? And so it's like this big thing at the school, et cetera, et cetera. But then in the subsequent year, it is, I am this young girl from like the white private school or like the final two contestants on the stage. And I am feeling all the pressure in the world, right? To win for the Black people, right? And to win, and
he was like, I gotta do this.
And I did. But, here's the thing. It's like, I felt like, yes, my parents built me up. Yes, my parents encouraged me. Yes, it did all these wonderful things. But I also still, I think, developed this very unhealthy sense of I have to prove to them that I am as good as. And so you don't want your child to be like, I'm inferior to white people. But at the same time, don't want them to think that they have to compete against them explicitly in order to prove that they are not inferior. And so it's a really tricky kind of balance.
I know. And I feel like in my adult life, I have really come to grips with that in terms of, I think for obviously for a long time, going to Harvard undergrad and then Harvard Medical School, I feel like I was in these environments where like I had to give my 400, 500%.
Yeah.
But then what I learned was that like even my 50% is like everyone else is 100% because we're like in overdrive. And I literally, and really it's kind of been over the last 5 years, since my platform was grown as a health communicator, as a health equity advocate. And I've had to give a lot of talks. I said to myself, oh my goodness, you cannot go through this stress of having to like overperform every time.
And that's what we keep telling you have to work twice as hard. Right. You can't work twice as hard. You can't.
Right. And that's the other thing, like, I talk a little bit about in the book is like the idea of weathering.
Yeah.
Right. That Arlene Gerotimus, the public health researcher, has done a lot of research on for decades. But this idea that like dealing with that stress, right, of having to overperform, that causes a chronic wear and tear on our body.
The John Henry syndrome.
Henry syndrome.
Yeah.
Yes, John Henry syndrome.
Yeah.
That prematurely ages us.
Yeah.
That makes us susceptible to chronic diseases.
Yeah.
Like that, it actually shortens our lives. And so that's why it's so funny. People always say like black don't crack. And like, yes, we look amazing as we get older, but what is happening inside of our bodies, even down to like the DNA level. I don't know if you've heard of like, telomeres. The telomeres are the ends of DNA. And as we get older, as human being gets older, those ends of the DNA molecules, they get shorter and shorter. Yep. But there's research now that when you look at the telomeres, the ends of DNAs of Black people and Hispanic people of a certain age, I think the 40s, and compare them against white people, our telomeres are shorter. Our telomeres look like we are older than we actually are. Yeah. And so that's why, like, I think we have to reclaim this, like, this idea of like working 2-3 times harder. No, do your best. Like, you wasn't put your best foot forward. Like, you just want to, I mean, and I think, like, I tell my children that, but not all the time either. Yeah. I was like, I just want you to enjoy school, right? And get the most out of it and feel internally motivated. But that, I think we've only begun to see like the tip of the iceberg of what that John Henryism, what that does to us.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. I won't say it completely broke me of this habit because I don't know if it can be completely broken of it. So I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and the joke is like everybody is pre-med at Washington.
Yes, I know a lot of
yeah, and so was I initially.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay. And so freshman year, at the end of freshman year, a bunch of Black guys decided we were all going to have our suite. We applied for a suite to have sophomore year. a suite, like a dorm.
A dorm. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
So
to get to room together.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 6 of us applied. Okay. You have to apply for this suite, and we were granted it. So over the summer, one of us withdraws, right? So now we are at risk of losing the suite, but the university, to spare us, like sticks this white guy who's a transfer student. Trust me. So it's like 5 black guys who know each other and have known each other since freshman year, and this white guy, Thomas, who's transferring in. So Thomas is pre-med too. So at WashU, I think all of the organic chemistry exams were, I feel like it was either Monday night or Tuesday night. I cannot remember the exact day. Regardless, the weekend before, everybody who has organic chemistry is studying for organic chemistry. Thomas, the white guy, would spend all day Sunday watching football. The pregame, the game, the postgame, the aftermath. And my thought was, wow, Thomas must be brilliant.
Right.
So that's just my assumption.
Of course, that's essential.
So second semester, we're looking around and Thomas isn't there. So we were like, what happened to Thomas? What happened to Thomas? Oh, he said he missed his friends back home. And one of my friends said, no, organic chemistry got in that ass. That's what happened to Thomas. But my reflex was when I see somebody a white person being completely lazy and I'm concerned was he must be brilliant. Not he's lazy, not he's goofing off, not he's...
Oh, he already knows it. He already knows this.
Yeah, and it's just like, why do I make that assumption? Because if I saw anybody else doing this, I would say, he's risking it, right? He's gonna get kicked out. But that kind of like reflex of like assuming the best of them and the worst of us is something, no matter how much our parents work with us on that.
I know.
It's really difficult to scrub out of our brains.
It really is. It really is. And I always feel like we just have to we have to be gentle with ourselves.
Yeah.
We really, really do. Like I said, for a long time, I gave 200-300%. Now I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to give, like when I would go on air for my MSNBC hits, like those hits are like 3 minutes long.
But how long would you prepare?
Like 2 hours.
Wow.
But I also felt like, okay, we are in the middle of a crisis. I am giving out really important information. I want to make sure that this is easily digestible. And especially I know a lot of Black folks, like a lot of Black folks watch that network, and they're getting a lot of health information from there. Yeah. So I was like, I just need to make sure that I'm giving out really accurate information. And I got people kind of like, oh, she just went on there for 3 minutes. I'm like, I went on there for 3 minutes, and I like studied for 2 hours to make sure that whatever I had to say was 100% right. And then, like every now and then someone would like comment on my Twitter, like, oh no, it should have been that number was slightly off, like something, just, so you sort of have to like, stay focused.
Yeah. Yeah. But that is, I think, the battle that a lot of Black parents of our generation in particular, because I think there are different Black generations have their own particular battle. And I think ours is trying to do more nuance than, like, I don't necessarily want to send my daughter out to battle white people the way that my family sent me out to prove, hey, see, y'all could have been at our schools aren't bad, we're not dumb, I feel like I had to represent that in a way, and I don't want that for my child.
Yeah, it's so interesting that my father worked for the Board of Education of New York City, and we didn't go to public school until high school. And so
that's telling.
I know, but then looking back, I felt like, okay, what is that? Yeah, yes, it's telling, but I really wish she could have said, this is why I felt like I couldn't have done that for you.
Yeah.
And I didn't know until I got older that my neighborhood was a formerly red line neighborhood, right? And so that's why, it was the quality of the school education he was concerned about. Or, we didn't have a grocery store. We always had to drive out of our neighborhood for a grocery store.
Yeah.
I'd seen several people get shot on my block, like that was just, Like, but I don't know if he didn't feel like he could have that conversation with us when we were kids, but I feel like that's what I want to do with my kids go to public school.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know about for middle school for the older one, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But again, just thinking about like, I think my dad just wanted to make sure that my dad is an immigrant from Jamaica. He came to the States when he was 17, right? And
yes.
My mother grew up.
And that would you would have a different concept about education coming from Jamaica.
Exactly. Yeah. My father feels like education is the way out.
Yeah. And it's something that you buy.
Yes. And then also home ownership. That's also the only way that you generate like wealth, you know? So like he's very much like fixed into those ideas. And even now as an 82-year-old man, like that is still...
Those things don't change.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, whereas I'm thinking about all of these like other ideas, like, you know, what's going to be the school where, you know, our older child can, you know, get the education, but also the supportive environment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, I don't need him to go to Harvard. Actually, I'd rather him go to Morehouse or some other HBCU.
I thought one of the things that jumped out at me when you just mentioned it again, your mother's a doctor, your father's working for the Board of Education, and yet you are living in a neighborhood that's violent. And it suggests that we, even as a Black middle class, there's a difference between the Black middle class and white middle class in their distance from poverty.
Yes. Yeah. You know, when my parents bought our house in Brooklyn, the only reason my parents were, even though they were both professionals, the only reason they were able to qualify for a mortgage was because my father was a veteran. But because it's a formerly red line neighborhood, there weren't a lot of mortgages being offered there.
Yeah.
And that's what they could afford.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, at my neighborhood, I loved my neighborhood growing up. I loved my neighbors would look out for each other. But for me, it was normal. Like, this is normal. Yeah. That, you know, in the 90s or in 80s, we would have crack vials in our front yard.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, like within my home, it was just lots of love and safety. And I felt comfortable and nurtured. But it's like out there, you know, it was a different world. But I also feel like, yes, that is true that we, you know, you have these so-called successful professions, but we're still living with, you know, with our folks. We're still living with our family. But I live in the same neighborhood that my mom grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember Chris Rock's joke about living in a neighborhood. I think it was him, Jay-Z, Mary J. Blige. And then there was a white dentist. You remember that joke he said?
No.
He said, I'm not saying it's anybody who invented teeth. He was just a regular yank your teeth out dentist. And he's living in all these Black celebrities. So,
right. Yeah.
So
yes.
He's a regular dentist and he's living next to Jay-Z.
Yeah, exactly.
and Mary J. Blige, just like...
I know. Well, that's what I also think about, you know, maternal mortality, for example. I always say, you know, Black women, like Black women with a college education or higher are still, you know, 5 times more likely to die than a white woman with an 8th grade education of pregnancy-related complications. Yeah. And that's why
I've seen that stat, and it's just shocking.
And that's because that, you know, having the professional education does not protect us the same way that it does for white folks.
But yeah, to me, that is the real difference between, like we said, Black middle class and white middle class is this. It's a short drop to the bottom. It's not, you know, you're not that high up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great pre-conversation, a great conversation to have with you, and really looking forward to talking to you more.
Thank you. Same
Thank
here.
you.